Welcome to Lumina, the House of Education. This podcast exists to make a difference. Here, real stories from classrooms, schools, and education systems are brought together to reshape what education is meant to be in modern times. We talk about leadership, responsibility, values, and the human side of learning. This is a space for education leaders who are done reacting and ready to lead. Let's begin.
For the longest time, the discussion around artificial intelligence in K-12 education, it really felt like a single contained classroom question.
Right. It was almost exclusively about academic integrity.
Exactly. Can students use it? Is it cheating? Is it helpful? Or is it just, another distraction?
And that focus made sense initially, because that was where the technology first really showed up in the daily life of schools. But a fundamental shift has occurred. Quietly, almost without anyone noticing, AI stopped being just a teacher question and became decisively a governance question for district leadership, for school boards.
And that transition is so critical for you to understand, because the moment generative AI enters the school system, it brings a lot more than just quick answers.
Oh, absolutely. It introduces new systemic risks, huge data concerns, urgent policy needs, and immediate liability issues.
So suddenly the superintendent isn't worried about lesson plans. They're worried about compliance and risk management.
Precisely. The sources we've been looking at, especially the reporting from Education Week, they make this shift absolutely central to their findings. The uncomfortable truth for so many administrators now is that ignoring AI is riskier, far riskier than strategically adopting it.
Okay, that feels a little counterintuitive. Why is avoidance the greater risk?
Well, because the reality is that adoption has already happened, whether leadership has approved it or not.
Right, it's already there.
Students are already using tools like ChatGPT, teachers are experimenting with it for drafting rubrics, and the vendor market is incredibly active.
Oh.
So when a teacher or a student uses an unapproved tool, what we call shadow IT, the district is suddenly exposed to all these unknown legal and data security risks.
So let me get this straight. If the district doesn't provide sanctioned, vetted tools and clear rules, staff and students will just use the outside tools anyway.
Yes.
But without any of the district's legal protections in place.
Exactly. And the sources point out that a lot of districts rushed into these quick pilots last year to try and get a handle on this. But pilots, while they're useful for testing instructional ideas, they don't actually protect the district.
They're basically temporary tryouts.
That's a great way to put it. Pilots don't answer the big questions like, what happens to the student data entered into this system? Does this vendor comply with state laws? And crucially, they don't help you when a parent asks the school board, who approved this tool and what steps did you take to protect my child's information?
Right.
The real challenge is moving from those temporary pilots to establishing durable policies that define the district's core values and, draw those legal and ethical boundaries. That's why AI has moved upstairs.
From the classroom to the cabinet meeting?
And right onto the board agenda.
Let's unpack the size of this governance challenge, because the data we have shows just how far behind so many districts are in creating those guardrails.
It's pretty stark.
According to a survey last summer by the EdWeek Research Center, nearly half of all teachers, principals, and district leaders, 45%, say their school or district flat out lacks an AI policy.
That is just a staggering policy deficit for a technology that is already everywhere. But it gets even more complicated when you dig a little deeper.
Go on.
An additional 16% said that while they do have a policy on the books, it doesn't establish what they call meaningful guardrails for how to use it in the classroom.
So if you combine those two figures, we're talking about almost 2/3 of the education system operating in this AI-driven world without any clear, useful direction.
And the state level isn't exactly stepping in to fill that gap either.
What does the data tell us there about top-down guidance?
Well, a separate survey found that only 40% of states reported having any sort of AI guidance at all. And this is where the lack of central organization really stands out. Only 2 states, Ohio and Tennessee, currently require their local school districts to have comprehensive AI policies.
Just 2.
Just 2. So for the most part, local districts are left scrambling to define their own rules. It's decentralized and, frankly, pretty inefficient.
So with this policy vacuum, let's talk about why these guidelines are so essential, beyond just, catching plagiarism. Brie Dussault from the Center on Reinventing Public Education highlights 4 crucial imperatives.
Right. And these 4 points really define what a policy should do, not just what it should say.
Okay.
First, a policy has to demystify AI for the whole community, make it clear what the technology is, what it isn't, and what the district plans to use it for. Second, it has to give absolute clarity to teachers and students on what appropriate use looks like in practice.
And the third?
Third, it has to communicate clearly to parents about their children's exposure to the technology, which ties directly into data privacy.
That third point feels huge. It brings us right back to the liability we mentioned. Can you just quickly clarify that specific data risk for our listeners?
Of course. So when we talk about AI policy, we're usually talking about generative AI, like the popular chatbots. If a staff member or a student pastes identifiable student data, a name, an ID number, or anything sensitive into one of these public chatbots, that information is often ingested by the vendor.
And then used to train their models.
Exactly. And that risks violating federal laws like FERPA, the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. So policies have to draw a really firm line around what can and cannot be entered into these tools.
That clarification is vital. Okay, so what was the fourth imperative?
The fourth point, and this is maybe the most strategic one, is that an AI policy must help leaders connect the tech to the larger goals of the school system itself. It has to be a tool for achieving the mission, not just another fire to put out.
That makes perfect sense. But the sources also suggest it isn't so much about the formality of the policy, but the clarity and flexibility of the direction. Let's look at how districts are trying to stay flexible, because this technology changes, daily?
Absolutely. The traditional process of writing a policy, getting it through committees, getting a board vote, that can take 6-9 months.
And by then it's obsolete.
It's totally obsolete. Leadership has to give direction and guardrails quickly.
And some districts are really embracing that. Take Arlington Public Schools in Virginia. They don't have a formal board-approved policy. Instead, they use a framework. They call it a living document that's right there on the district's website.
And that living document approach gives them the agility they need. Arlington has an AI steering committee that's constantly collecting feedback, and they meet at least every other week to review that input and update the framework right on the website.
The benefit there seems obvious. Updates happen immediately, no waiting for a board vote. But if it's not a formal policy, where does the liability fall if something goes wrong? Doesn't that create some legal ambiguity?
That is the trade-off. It definitely introduces a level of ambiguity that a formal policy might reduce. But Arlington's approach prioritizes speed and transparency. Everyone, parents, vendors, you name it, can see the exact same guidance that teachers are getting.
So they're betting that clear, immediate guidance is better than slow, formal guidance that's instantly out of date.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they are layering their security. Arlington has a really rigorous internal process for vetting any AI tools, and they embed crucial guidelines into existing board-approved documents, like the acceptable use policy.
Okay, so they're weaving it into the existing structure.
Right. It helps reduce risk while keeping that instructional flexibility.
Now, when we talk about building these rules, we also have to look at inclusivity, like who is actually in the room writing them. The sources make a really strong case that these policies can't just be written by the IT department in a vacuum.
This is such a critical insight. Let's look at Tucson Unified School District in Arizona. Tracy Metcalf-Rowley, who leads this work, she makes the case that because AI impacts every single function of the district, you have to get input from a really broad range of people.
How broad are we talking?
We're talking human resources, communications, transportation, even school nutrition staff, not just teachers.
Wait, hold on. Transportation, school nutrition. How does an AI policy impact bus routes or the cafeteria? You have to give us a concrete example there.
I can. So in HR, AI is already being used to draft job descriptions or sift through applications. The policy needs to address potential bias in those algorithms. For transportation, AI can optimize bus routes. The policy has to say how the GPS data from that software is handled, especially if AI is generating the routes. AI isn't just a learning tool anymore.
It's an organizational productivity tool.
It is. So Tucson's task force had over 40 people on it. And crucially, they made sure to include district employees who were also parents, so they got that vital perspective of someone who both uses the system and is protected by it.
So how did Tucson balance that need for formality with the need for flexibility? We just heard about Arlington's living document. What's Tucson's approach?
They took a dual approach. They have a formal policy that's succinct, board-approved, and focused on broad ethical use. That policy has to be updated and voted on every year, so it can't get stale.
Okay.
But then, separate from that, they publish these detailed guidelines that are easily updated. They focus on the nitty-gritty of daily use-like grading with AI, or how teachers need to update their syllabi. It's a smart way to keep high-level legal guardrails formal, while the operational rules stay agile.
That dual structure seems like a powerful way to manage both the legal side and the rapid change. Okay, so here's the next major hurdle the sources identify. Policy documents, expensive AI products, they're all meaningless if staff don't know how to use the tech. Policy has to be paired with professional development.
That cannot be overstated. We're seeing districts prioritize comprehensive training right away. Tucson offers basic AI literacy courses, but also specialized training for specific jobs. And Arlington, they made basic AI training mandatory for all staff this year, with optional advanced courses.
And this professional development isn't just about, hey, here's a cool new feature, which is how Tech PD often goes. This is fundamentally about safety and legal compliance.
Precisely. Training is your last line of defense against liability. It helps ensure staff don't accidentally do something legally problematic, like going back to our earlier point-pasting student info into an unvetted chatbot. The policy sets the rule, but training makes sure the rule is understood and followed.
So beyond the PD and data rules, what specific classroom elements should a comprehensive AI policy really define?
Well, experts suggest a good policy has to define several key things: parameters for choosing AI tools, specific steps for student data privacy, and clear warning language about AI bias. Crucially, it must establish AI literacy standards for students, and it has to define appropriate student use.
Meaning, where is that line between using a tool to learn and using it to cheat?
Exactly that.
Let's pivot to the educators on the front lines, because they are already using AI. They're brainstorming, drafting emails, creating rubrics. What are their specific demands for future policy?
Their concerns really focus on relevance and consultation. We saw this with Al Rabanera, a math teacher in California. He voiced a very valid concern that if teachers aren't consulted, district policies might end up reflecting tech company priorities more than what educators actually need in the classroom.
That's a great point. What are they asking for that leaders might miss?
Rabanera wants future AI policy to be far more tailored to each subject. I mean, the way you use AI in a high school math class, where you have to show your work, is fundamentally different from how you'd use it in an English class, where it's all about originality and critical analysis.
Yeah, the policy has to reflect that nuance.
It does. And teachers also need consistency across classrooms, clear guidelines for their own training, and this is a big one, a clear answer to the equity question. Policies have to address the gap for students who don't have reliable AI access or high-speed internet at home.
Right. If an assignment requires AI, the district has to ensure everyone can actually use it.
It's an access issue.
It sounds like the districts doing this well got ahead of the curve. But the sources also show that some districts are just now starting this journey, acknowledging they are, and I'm quoting here, very, very late to it.
Yes, for many, this is all happening on the fly. We saw the example of Kerrville ISD in Texas, where the principal acknowledged they were late, but are now starting with PD, and encouraging teachers to test out the tech. It just highlights that this is not a solved problem. It's an evolving response across the country.
So if we pull all of this together, what's the central finding?
I think the central finding is that the challenge of AI in K-12 has unequivocally moved from being a simple classroom issue to a comprehensive organizational liability.
Yeah.
It's unavoidable, it speeds up change, and the cost of doing nothing is just too high. The districts getting it right are acting decisively, not by banning it, but by defining their values first, and then drawing clear, flexible boundaries around use, privacy, and training.
Absolutely. The sources really paint a picture of districts facing two very different paths. The ones who are either banning AI or just blindly adopting whatever the latest vendor sells them.
Right.
Versus the ones focused on developing these durable, flexible, and teacher-informed governance structures, like the examples we saw in Arlington and Tucson.
And that really leads to the final takeaway for you, the listener. The sources suggest that AI didn't fundamentally break education, but it did expose how unprepared many governance structures were for this kind of rapid technological change.
And that leaves us with a simple but very heavy question for school leaders moving forward. Will schools proactively lead this shift by setting the rules, establishing values, and training their people? Or will they merely react to it as the technology continues to accelerate and change the entire educational landscape around them? That's what's left for you to consider.
Education doesn't change through slogans. It changes when leaders are willing to look again at what really matters. If this episode raised a question worth sitting with, then it did its job. This is Lumina, the House of Education. We'll continue the conversation tomorrow.